Our next guest and the last guest in this block is Johnathan Glancey, currently the architecture critic of The Guardian, and before that the architecture critic of The Independent. I've read your book, London, Bread and Circuses, and I was kind of really astonished how frank, honest, direct, and occasionally brutal it was. And if I compare it to your architecture reviews, I notice a kind of huge gap in terms of, I don't know whether it's sincerity or freedom, in terms of articulating a kind of genuinely critical kind of point of view. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's a very interesting notion that the media is certainly not free. It never has been. And even newspapers that set themselves up, like The Independent in 1986, to be just that, independent, or The Guardian, which is owned by a charitable trust rather than a monster like Rupert Murdoch, these newspapers theoretically are free to publish what they like, to discuss things in any way they like. But actually there's a kind of passive force at work, which I've been hyper-aware of for a number of years now, really, that tries to bring all argument down to a very safe, comfortable level of gentle, easy massage. Now, as an independent writer, if you go to, I don't mean if you're working as a journalist, as a critic, you go to section editors of newspapers, they don't really want you to let rip unless you're given a job at that moment to be the columnist who is known to let rip. Then you would be labelled, and as they say today, with everything branded. Sorry, branded is not how it's said. It's said today, branded. I can't quite get the words right. But branding everything. So if you want to be a critic, you want to discuss something like architecture and planning, you will actually be told in a very soft system, it's very strange, very soft way, not to be too tough. And in fact, the way that's done is not by telling you can't write about certain things, it's saying you should be only writing about certain things. In other words, architecture at the moment, for instance, is largely about nice, shiny buildings. Most of them these days are called iconic. Rem designed some himself, and the more exciting the buildings are, the more excited the commissioning editors are. Equally, if they don't have the big iconic buildings, they want lovely, shiny houses, the sort of houses you've all built yourself or converted, your lovely, gorgeous flat you found in a skip and converted and made very charming. That's what the media wants. In other words, a happy, shiny, passive world with a few bits of exciting maverick quality, like a building by Zaha Hadid, Danny Libeskind, Rem Koolhaas, and so on. To be truly free to write what you want, you have to write books. And that's noted now. And then you write the book, and then you can get an article published on the back of the book. It's a very, very strange publishing system, and it's consistent throughout the mass media.
One of the things I was very interested in hearing from you is actually we've asked many of the speakers about a sort of a theory about London, and London being too complex somehow to have a theory. Now your book, Bread and Circuses, is very much a kind of a almost manifesto or a pamphlet about London now. So I was wondering if you can somehow try to tell us, starting from Bread and Circuses, but bringing it right into the present, how you see this city now.
When a city gets to a certain size, and I think ancient Rome was the first city, of course, to get to the size I'm going to mention, which is over 1 million people, it develops certain characteristics, which are a desire to do more and more things. So the bigger a city, the more activity it has. A city like London now of 8 million people has a tremendous number of activities, including such things as a 24-hour talkathon. I mean, extraordinary events like this happen when a city gets so big. People in big cities want to keep doing more and more and more. As those cities get wealthier, people want to do more exciting, thrilling things. They want to be constantly excited as we are here. We're trying to excite ourselves all the time. Now, there's a danger of that, which certainly the Roman emperors and Roman patrician class understood very early on, is that there's a danger of people, of course, getting bored, and when they get too bored, they start kicking balls around the street and kicking heads around the street, and they get rough and violent. London itself, when it became very prosperous and exciting city in the 18th century, became one of the most violent cities in the Western world. Its riots were famous, its mob was famous. It was actually a very, very vicious place at times indeed. The response, on the one hand, from the authorities was to be vicious back, and London famously probably there were more ways of getting yourself executed in London in the mid-18th centuries than there were in many European cities. Tiny crimes could lead to a public execution. The public executions themselves were, of course, great entertainments. They excited the crowd. They were a way of releasing violence. That was later replaced by association football and other events. And today by, of course, culture. And culture has grown and grown and grown to become a great mass entertainment, whether television or public events or museums or art galleries, or, of course, coming out now, the Olympics. To run a city now, to stop where people are passive and fundamentally bored, cities of a certain scale, you must keep people entertained to stop them becoming aggressive and violent. And if you look at what's happened in London in the last 40 years, absolutely fascinating, there are virtually no political demonstrations anymore. Oh yes, there was very occasionally, the Iraq War did one. What's happened with Lebanon? Virtually nothing. Just watch. The events that happen are tiny. People are not out there saying we want to change the world, man, or just saying we protest. They can all be bought off. Sunday shopping, how wonderful. What a great thing. Surfing the internet, wonderful. Downloading your iPod. Going to the Tate Modern. Going to a talkathon. Whatever it is, keep the people amused. Shopping malls, blue water. Keep building them bigger and bigger and bigger and shinier. And you will people will just act out a very soft, gentle, easy life. And I think that's what has happened to a city like London, wonderfully exciting in some ways because everyone has access to all these things, but deeply passive and with none of that lovely energy that it once had.
One of the topics you've addressed particularly strongly in your recent thoughts is that sort of problematic notion of regeneration. Is the word in English? Regeneration?
Regeneration is a word used by politicians.
Exactly, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about this because I think it's something you're actually working on right now. And
very much. Well, let's take an example in London of how to excite people and try and make them feel there's things happening in the future. The two big projects in London for architecture planning and culture and political excitement internally within London's own logic are the Olympics and the Thames Gateway. They're both wrapped around this notion of regeneration. Traditionally, of course, that was a spiritual notion, to regenerate yourself and your soul and your spirit. Today, it means something quite different. It's a word used by these endlessly growing quangos that you see around you. Just whilst I'm talking, I think a new quango has been formed there, another one there with 25 people with new jobs who will talk about regeneration, accessibility, 24-hour lifestyles, yakety, 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 yak. And these things will grow. The Olympics, the Thames Gateway are just extraordinarily cynical ways of trying to keep us entertained. They're property development by other words. It's a way of making London a deeply passive, property development-led, business-led city, which of course it always has been. But in that notion of regeneration is not real. It's not about making the place a better place. It's about making more opportunities for business, for property development, and for keeping people into their Sunday shopping way of life.
Are we victims?
Well, yeah, of course.
Are you a victim?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'm a Londoner, so of course I am. Londoners in history, though, tend to fight back every so often.
I would like to compare your kind of presentation to the one of Doreen Massey. Did you attend that? Did you hear that?
Which is that?
Doreen, she was a couple of hours earlier. You were there?
Oh, what is she? Yeah, hi.
Do you know each other?
No.
No. Okay. She's a professor of geography and is kind of presenting a kind of critique of London, which is on one hand kind of more precise and let's say less apocalyptic, and on the other hand kind of more political. How do you think your rhetoric helps us?
You need to be. You need to be political.
Or what do you want to achieve with your rhetoric?
Okay.
Because you, on one hand, kind of told us that you cannot say what you want to say in the paper, but you say it here in a kind of very eloquent way, and in a way, in an eloquence that is almost contradictory to your seeming powerlessness in the media.
Interesting. I'm with you, Rem. There's no question that there are a lot of, delightful new buildings or developments to show people and to say these are good things. So one can write about those, you know, when one actually likes them and thinks they're a good thing, one can write about them in a gently positive way. There's no problem with that, balancing it with a big political picture. The problem is there's not enough of that. We're talking about a very political subject, architecture, planning. I mean, hugely political, and we can't get away from that. The danger is the media tries to depoliticize the whole time.
Right, but are you repoliticizing it?
Yeah.
With this book?
Sure. I mean, I'm doing another book following up, which will be much bigger on the whole notion of regeneration and really looking at the several ways of looking at that, looking at the language of it, the rhetoric of it, and then looking particularly at the way that a lot of the hot air that's used to talk about it is a sort of smokescreen to look after property development. If you look what's happening out in that Thames Gateway area, it's extraordinary. I don't know how many, if any of you have been to any of these conferences about regeneration. They're absolutely wonderful to go to. I mean, you'd be bored stiff after the second hour, but they're very, very entertaining to listen to the language and to watch the people who are regenerating your cities for you.
Usually
These are professional
introduced by John
men.
Preston.
Well, John Prescott's, of course, a joke, but meanwhile, on the Quangos and these regeneration bodies, there are many people whose professional lives is to be a professional Quango person, and they're trying to create worlds where they can tick boxes and make neat developments and say they're happy, shiny, 24-hour accessible cappuccino, la-di-la-di-la-di-la-di-la, and in fact, they're just building a kind of purgatory.
Did you choose your title yourself?
Yeah.
Because we've been confronted with a number of people who were forced to change their titles. So in this case,
because London is like London in a way.
It's called London Bread and Circuses. Is that metaphor not a little bit on the neat side?
It's very much on the neat side, but there was a point of, it was towards the late 18th century and into the 19th century where many people living in London and certainly running London started to be aware, as Britain developed its empire, that they started to become aware of this notion that London was the new Rome, and inevitably there are indeed some of the same things happening. Rome was a city like London at its height that was both planned and chaotic, and London's both planned and chaotic. They have some of the same problems, and I think that's, I couldn't help feeling that the way today we try and keep everybody living this happy, shiny, calm, consumerist life was very similar in a certain way as the way that the Romans organised a bread and circuses way of life to keep people amused with the same equivalent of shopping and sport.
One of the things we are trying to do is that there is a kind of a list at the end of the marathon of kind of toolboxes, a toolbox list. It's kind of toolboxes from sort of previous times or previous generations. I was wondering if you look at the urban condition of London now, what have been for you kind of models which you think could be interesting to mention?
There are London's a funny city. It's a mercantile city, of course. I mean, rapaciously mercantile. It's a city based initially on, from its great days from, say, Queen Elizabeth, on piracy, on big business just cutting a swaggering sway through the world of commerce, of ships going out, which later became the Royal Navy, just raiding other navies, other ships, sinking the Spaniards, bringing the gold in. This has always been a rapacious, piratical city, and that has been its great strength financially. At the moment, it's going through that phase where that is the predominant force working at the city. It's sort of ruthless commercialness. But there are moments where it tries to be good. Now, they're few and far between. My favourite moment, which probably is one that's almost totally incomprehensible to anybody who didn't know this city more than 50 years ago. You'd have to know it 50 years ago, and I didn't, of course, wasn't born, but we know about it. It was that wonderful moment where you had public authorities, public bodies, a public realm that was genuinely growing, run by very, very decent people who really believed you could do something with this great city and its wealth to improve its public life. They were, of course, the London County Council, which ran from 1889 and was destroyed became the Greater London Council, destroyed by Mrs. Thatcher, and the London Passenger Transport Board. I just bang on about that book. Can you imagine that London Transport was one of the greatest civilizing agents in Western Europe for a period of about 20 years? Almost impossible to imagine. The notion that you all here and everybody outside in London deserves the best in architecture, engineering, planning, and that is possible to do. So there was that moment where you had public bodies, people working in a public realm, who really genuinely believed it. Well, those people, of course, have been cleared out very successfully today, and we're back in our rapacious, piratical, thuggish, properly developing world.
We had a conversation with the new manager of public transport, and
Tim O'Toole.
Your description is kind of identical,
And we also had
and
a
he
comment.
definitely wants a return of that moment.
Well, he would. I mean, look at that poor man, Tim O'Toole, with whose. You've seen how piratical our public services now are. Look at that poor man, Tim O'Toole, trying to run London Transport today, or Peter Hendy, his number 2, or whatever he is, the Commissioner for Transport in London. They're not allowed to do what they want, to run the thing as well as they want to, because they're very, all their maintenance contracts and all this have been sold off to cowboy businessmen who are in it just to make a fast buck and to top up their pension funds and go and play golf and to retire to smart villas abroad. But it's utterly cynical, but our public services are run that way now, and that break up of the public realm by flogging it off to business people who don't give a damn about the results, just the profit, is something that creates deep cynicism amongst all of us. Certainly something you've watched the new Labour movement, the new Labour, new Workers' Party, whatever it's called, suffering from very badly the last few years as it plunges into this world of ultra-capitalism, and it's not, in the end, I don't think, what any of us want.
Many thanks, Johnathan Glancey. Thank you
very
very much.
much, everyone.